G'day everyone, I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute, and welcome to Unparliamentary, our fortnightly show that gives you the scoop on what's happening in federal politics, with a special guest journalist every fortnight. And this week I'm delighted to introduce Rachel Withers, the Editor-in-Chief of The Politics. G'day Rachel.
Hi, Ebony. Lovely to be here.
Thanks for joining us. For people who don't know, The Politics is a daily newsletter that you can sign up to. It's free. You can do that and subscribe at thepolitics.com.au, and you'll get a fantastic newsletter from Rachel in your inbox at 4 p.m. every day. So if you aren't subscribed, make sure you head on over and do that today. I would like to start by acknowledging that I live and work on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country and pay my respects to elders past and present. And I would also like to say that this year, 2024, is the Australia Institute's 30th anniversary. And for 30 years, we've been introducing big new ideas to the national conversation to shape the national policy debate for the better. And we're bringing out a whole range of really fantastic international speakers, some of the best thinkers in the world, to Australia this year as part of our 30th anniversary celebrations. And on that note, our two public events with Yanis Varoufakis in Melbourne and Sydney are sold out. But due to overwhelming popular demand, we are doing a live stream for our Yanis Varoufakis event in Melbourne tomorrow night. Tickets for that are on sale until midnight tonight. So head on over to australiainstitute.org.au to pick up those tickets and so you don't miss out. Should be a great event. And you can find all our other events and webinars there to sign up to as well. Just a reminder, you can use the Q&A box to type in questions for Rachel in the second half of the webinar. And you should also be able to upvote other people's questions that you think are really good. And finally, a reminder that this is being recorded and the video will go up on our website later today. So as always, there's a lot happening in federal politics, Rachel. We've had the Dunkley by-election on the weekend, which Labor won despite some dire warnings in the lead up about voter backlash for breaking its promises on the stage 3 tax cuts. ASEAN is kicking off in Melbourne. Yanis is in town. It's Super Tuesday in the United States. I mean, there is a lot happening. It's a pretty big start to the political year.
Enormous. I mean, it seems like it always is. And, I think especially having a by-election falling so early in the year. Of course, Dunkley had a by-election due to the death of the sitting member, Peter Murphy. But it meant that from the very second we launched into this year, it was all just Dunkley, 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 Dunkley. And of course, now we've got the result of that. And I think it's fair to say that it was a bit of a fizzer for the coalition. There was, obviously, we had, I think for Labor, they wanted to make this all about the changes to the stage 3 tax cuts, which they did to show that they were listening to those cost of living concerns, especially in a seat like Dunkley. The coalition seemed to want to make it about a few other things. We had a lot of focus on, 2 weeks ago it was a boat arrival and, the borders are not secure. And then in the days leading up to that vote on Saturday, very much a focus again on the release of immigration detainees from indefinite detention, which is something that was a High Court ruling at the end of last year, and the coalition were obviously eager to make that into the issue.
Yeah, that's something we've seen them do kind of a lot of in the past. And so it really was, harking back to some of those old tried and tested strategies for the coalition. How did that manifest in the actual by-election itself, in the campaigning?
Well, I mean, we saw it, I think, particularly coming from the deputy leader of the Liberal Party, Susan Lee, who, I think it's interesting. She previously was taking on this role in the coalition of like the moderating influence on Peter Dutton. She was there to be the woman who might help the Liberals win back the Teal votes. But we really saw her go really hard on this real dog whistling, fear-mongering campaign in the final days. She put out a tweet on the Thursday night before the vote about sort of saying, if you're worried about foreign criminals, you need to vote against Labor. If you're worried about women being assaulted by foreign criminals, and this was just like taking what we've been seeing over the past few weeks and really just like basically dropping the dog whistle and picking up the megaphone instead. And of course, that what she was referring to there was a case in Melbourne of a someone had been charged with assault and stalking, and as it turned out, it was a case of mistaken identity, but for a few hours there it was reported that it was someone who had been released from detention. So Susan Lee decided to take this and absolutely run, as you say, like the sort of fear campaign, race baiting scare campaign that we've seen before from the coalition. Peter Dutton famously tried the same thing with the African gangs in Melbourne a few years ago, but it just fell completely flat. And I think there was widespread condemnation when Susan Lee chose to take the dog whistle up a notch. She backed down. I thought it was embarrassing for the coalition really to take a step beyond. And I think when they do go a little bit too far, you do see the media was widely critical. Like this was being talked about on things like Sunrise and the Today Show, morning breakfast commercial TV, but in a way that was sort of like critical of her and asking her to explain herself. So I don't think it then actually had the intended effect. Of course, the swing we ended up seeing in Dunkley was actually pretty much the average swing that you expect against a government in a by-election. And in a cost of living crisis, in a seat like Dunkley, which is, quite a mix socioeconomically, but it is actually traditionally like a bit of a swing seat. It was kind of an average result. So I think it showed that kind of campaigning just didn't really resonate in Dunkley. And it seems as if, the focus was on cost of living. Labor effectively neutralised kind of some cost of living concerns with their decision to tweak the stage 3 tax cuts. And it just showed that their minds were focused in the right place, whereas it seemed like the coalition was not where the voters were.
I was just going to say, I thought it was really interesting, like the electoral politics of it, because, there's been a lot of talk that at the next election, Peter Dutton had essentially given up on the Teals and the focus was going to be on outer suburban seats and winning those from Labor. And that seemed to me to be like, these would be ideal conditions for an opposition to try and get this kind of seat. It's exactly the kind of seat they're going to need to win if that's the strategy. And as you said, like it's a cost of living crisis. We've had multiple interest rate rises, all of that, and, an immigration scare campaign. Like normally those are all the ingredients that work really well for a coalition, and a by-election. Voters are often more willing to send a message to a government. So what do you think that says for the coalition's prospects overall, or for, I guess, Dutton's approach that really seemed to fail to resonate in this kind of seat where all those ingredients were in place?
Yeah, look, I think if you were Anthony Albanese on Saturday night, you'd be feeling pretty comfortable because it seems that the Peter Dutton's approach or supposed approach of going after these mortgage belt sort of outer suburban seats, he's gone and said we're now the party of regional and suburban Australia. It doesn't seem to be working. Like these working class booths, most of them really stuck with Labor. It doesn't seem like Peter Dutton has actually worked out how to get those voters. Of course, I think the fact that a lot of these electorates, these Labor electorates, voted no to the referendum last year gave Peter Dutton a bit of hope that he was reaching them. But, we've seen the coalition lose Aston, or the Liberal Party lose Aston last year, and now fail to make inroads in Dunkley. And these are exactly the kind of seats that they should be able to get if their strategy is to leave the Teal seats with the Teals and go after Labor heartland. Of course, now we're seeing a little bit of commentary from the kind of moderate liberals who would love to go back and get the teal seats back, maybe people who lost teal seats themselves. Tim Wilson and Jason Falinski do often pop up in the media and point out that the strategy is wrong, and they are using the Dunkley result to try to reignite this idea that the strategy is wrong, that the Liberal Party can't actually win government without also appealing to these wealthy inner city electorates, the six that fell at the 2022 election, plus Warringah, which fell a little the election before that. And so yeah, we are seeing now this debate in the Liberal Party again over who they are and who they're trying to speak to. And I mean, from my perspective, you know, Peter Dutton has said, no, we haven't given up on the teal seats. You know, he's responded a little bit to that commentary, but I think by having Peter Dutton as the leader, they have given up on the teal seats. You know, he just seems to be sort of anathema to everything those seats stand for in terms of climate, in terms of gender, even, you know, in terms of the way they speak about race. And I think what is happening to Susan Lee is also very interesting, because she claims to be the one who can still speak to these teal seats. She's the one who often goes on little speaking tours of North Sydney. But she too is going down this, I guess we'd say, you know, far right sort of post-truth path. And it's actually fascinating because, you know, Susan Lee does think she's the one who can speak to women, who can win back women. But it seems her appeals to women, and the one we saw last week, are really that sort of white woman sort of fear of the other. You know, she was very much like speaking to women in that tweet, but she's not doing it in a way that appeals to moderate teal seats. She's doing it in I think we can say a racist way.
Yeah. I do want to just spend a little bit of time on what Labor brought to that election, because some of the things that I can see people commenting on in the chat are, you know, the Greens didn't do particularly well in this seat. There wasn't a teal candidate, and the Liberal kind of party had maybe soaked up some of the vote that would normally go to a One Nation or kind of other minor right-wing parties in this election. But Labor did take a bit of a big chance redesigning the stage 3 tax cuts. That was a really big announcement when the Prime Minister made it, and it wasn't a small redesign of those tax cuts. And I guess, you know, they're very focused on the cost of living, and it feels like this won't be the last kind of offering that they have for voters with the budget coming up too. But traditionally, this has been really bad ground for the Labor Party, you know, but I think that reputation that John Howard established of interest rates always being lower and that kind of mythology, you know, Labor, I think, had a lot stacked against it, didn't have a very good end to last year. I guess holding the seat is the only thing that matters in politics, and they've managed to do that. But how much do you think stage 3 kind of helped them cut through that narrative that they weren't doing enough on the cost of living, enough to kind of start the year with a bit more enthusiasm, even if it was seen as that broken promise kind of narrative?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really did help cut through this idea that they weren't thinking about the cost of living. I personally would say they're still not doing enough on the cost of living, and that the stage 3 tax cuts were, you know, important, but small fry in the scheme of how much people are feeling the pain of this, you know, this interest rate cost of living crisis. I mean, I would refer to it as an inequality crisis. But yeah, certainly I think the fact that this was the Albanese government's focus for the start of the year was selling these tax cuts, and my God, they did not stop talking about them from the minute they decided to do it. You know, it was the main thing that Anthony Albanese wanted to go and talk about. It was the main thing backbenchers wanted to ask ministers about during question time, to the point that, you know, they sounded like a little bit of a broken record. But certainly the fact that that they had decided to turn their attention to this, I think, helped quell some of the unrest. I also don't think you can overlook just how much the fact that the coalition had no alternative also helped Labor out here. You know, Labor was able to say we're the ones looking at this, while the coalition sort of were trailing behind. They sort of were mad about the broken promise, but then they fell into line on it, and offering absolutely no cost of living policies themselves. So while I don't think Labor necessarily has done enough there, I think even just being the only party actually talking about it really helped them here.
Yeah. So I do want to, there's a couple of other things I want to touch on with the coalition. One is, it does strike me that they are still a little bit, oh, I'm going to sneeze. Hang on.
Bless you. What a
Excuse
cute
me.
sneeze.
One of the things was that idea about kind of a disconnection with the electorate, because as you said, there wasn't really anything from them around the cost of living. Nuclear strikes me as this other weird tangent they've taken themselves on that it's extremely odd to me. While they're trying to say that they want to reduce the cost of electricity, can we please build the most wildly expensive form of electricity? Seems to be a real odd approach. But I also want to get into the Cook pre-selections from last night and the problems the Liberal Party have had historically with female representation, attracting women voters and women into the party and pre-selecting them for safe seats. So maybe if we can start with nuclear and where you think that is going, because it just is really weird to me and strikes me as very risky. And I know it's just kind of a delaying tactic for their part, but yeah, I don't see how it's a vote winner.
It is weird, and I mean, what a set of pieces of news for the very first Monday after losing a by-election, nuclear and pre-selecting Amanda Cook. I mean, this nuclear thing, the coalition have been sort of pushing this throughout this first term of the Albanese government, even though they themselves were just in office for 9 years and didn't seem particularly interested in nuclear. I think they want to make nuclear just another culture war topic.
Right.
You have experts out there saying, nuclear is not feasible, it's not affordable. Meanwhile, we've got, the perfect conditions in this country for green energy, renewable energy revolution. But yeah, I think it's clear to the voters who are interested in climate that this is, as you say, a delaying tactic, that, it is just another sort of red herring to throw out there so that we can pause what's going on and what the Labor government is trying to do with renewable energy, and we're so behind on it. They are more than willing to take advantage of the fact that power prices have been high, and that's not because of renewable energy, but they're keen to make it seem as if what is the logical scientific solution is expensive, chaotic, farmers and their land are going to be taken away. And so, yeah, it is baffling because it's not clear who they're speaking to with this nuclear pitch. I mean, it's clear who they're speaking for, which is the fossil fuel industry, but it's not clear who they're speaking to. And, Dutton has come out and indicated that this is going to be a signature election policy, nuclear, including potentially nominating some sites for where there might be some small modular reactors.
Bold.
We'll see how that goes. Yeah, I mean, obviously they're confident that nothing would be built anytime soon, but we'll see how voters feel about having their electorates nominated. There's a great piece of artwork going around already of sort of one of those classic Aussie tourism posters for Noosa, but they've got a big nuclear reactor in the background because Ted O'Brien, the shadow energy minister, he is his Queensland electorate includes a little bit of Noosa, and he has said that he'd be happy to have a small modular reactor in his electorate. So we'll see how his voters feel about that.
Yeah, might put that one to the test, I guess. I'm really curious to see how that unfolds, just because it's so massively expensive and far-fetched. Like I'm actually really interested in how they try and sell it to the electorate. And then I did want to touch on that pre-selection for Cook as well. And then I just want to remind people you can type questions for Rachel and myself into the Q&A box, and you can also upvote questions from other people as well. So yeah, we've got Super Tuesday happening and other things that I want to get to. But just before we move off kind of domestic politics and other things, the Liberal Party has its own internal targets for increasing the number of women politicians and parliamentarians. But yeah, as you mentioned, we've seen them pre-select another bloke in Cook overnight.
Help themselves.
Yeah.
I mean,
How's that panning out for them?
oh, I mean, there's already been a bit of backlash. This is the candidate is Simon Kennedy, who previously ran in the seat of Bennelong and lost. He doesn't live in the seat of Cook, and he won the pre-selection last night for Cook, beating out a couple of candidates, one of whom was a woman by the name of Gwen. Let me just grab it up. She was like John Howard's preferred candidate and everything. And she's a veterans advocate, Gwen Churn. But she received 35 votes compared to Simon Kennedy's 158, and a controversial local mayor, Carmelo Pesce, who got 90. So, the amount of times the coalition has said we need more women, but we don't want to do quotas. We don't need quotas. We believe in democracy. But every single shadow minister I heard asked about this by-election, this pre-selection, in the days leading up to it, said, yeah, of course we'd love to see a woman. It's up to the voters of Cook, the pre-selectors of Cook. Everybody indicating, even John Howard said in The Australian something along the lines of, if every other box is ticked, gender isn't crucial, but if every other box is ticked and you have a great candidate who's a woman, ticking the female box is a plus.
Yeah.
And what did they go and do? They went and voted for a man again. And it just, it could not be more apparent that they are never going to get there without quotas. These pre-selectors elect people who look like them. And it seems like the branch members of Cook are probably also men. Look, it is just the amount of reviews they've had that have said we need targets, non-binding, but targets of 50% women by, with at different points, they've said different years. There was a long-standing target of 50% women by 2025, which seems to have just been like forgotten for a while. And then after the 22 federal election, which obviously saw women turn away in droves, review said we need to have a target of 50% women. But absolutely nothing is done in order to actually ensure that happens. It's madness. And the number of Liberal women in the House of Reps is like actually at an incredibly low number right now because they lost so many women.
Yeah, actually, so I've got some stats on that. So my colleague Bill Brown pulled together, he looked at parliaments overall and found that women are underrepresented in 7 of Australia's 9 parliaments. Only in the ACT are there more women than men, 14 to 11. Victoria has exact gender parity at a state level with 64 men and 64 women. And in Queensland Parliament, women are outnumbered more than 2 to 1. And the Labor Party achieved gender parity 2 years ahead of its 2025 target. And in the federal parliament, women now outnumber men in the Labor Party room. There's 53% women, and that, as you've said, is a result of quotas, and that's how they achieve that. And by contrast, the Liberal Party has fewer women in parliaments than it did when it set its target of 50% representation. And as you just mentioned, Rachel, its improvement in the proportion of women who are Liberal parliamentarians is not because they're pre-selecting and winning more seats, but just because so many male Liberals lost their seats at the last election. So not exactly the best. It's not a winning strategy, let's put it that way, and not an effective one either.
I mean, you have to question, you know, the amount of times they've said, yes, we want to see more women in parliament. But if you don't do anything, and it's quite clear to anyone paying attention that not doing anything won't get you there, then do you really want to see more women in parliament? I
Yeah.
think so.
So yeah, I did want to touch on, I don't think we'll spend too much time on it because it's kind of only just kicking off, but the Prime Minister and Treasurer made an announcement this morning about a new $2 billion fund to encourage investment in, I think, clean energy and other things in Southeast Asia as part of ASEAN kicking off in Melbourne, I think today. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple of announcements yesterday as well, about maritime security, which I think we all know who that refers to. But yeah, no, they're trying to make a really big announcement today, in terms of this focus on trade and investment, with ASEAN nations, and you know. We have heard from the special envoy to Southeast Asia that last year trade was underweight and stagnant, with Australia ranking as ASEAN's 8th largest trading partner. So there is clear effort from the Albanese government to refocus on this area and reinvest. And yeah, I'm sure we will be hearing much more with this taking place in Melbourne.
Yeah, over the next couple of days. And I guess it would also be part of, Australia trying, I mean, Penny Wong went on that big blitz of kind of countries and reaching out to reestablish connections with a bunch of places. And the Australia Institute has talked a lot about really reinvesting in diplomacy and trade and prioritizing those in terms of our foreign policy. So yeah, I'll be interested to see if any other announcements or what other announcements come out of ASEAN this week. But as that kind of is a bridge to international politics, I did, before we go to questions from the audience, want to touch on the fact that it's Super Tuesday in the United States. And we're hurtling towards the presidential election. So just tell us a little bit about what's happening there and what's at stake.
Yeah, so Super Tuesday is kind of the big day in the presidential primaries over there in the US. It's the day that 15 different states are holding their primaries all at once. I mean, it's not really a real primary that's going on, because you've got kind of two pretty much preordained candidates. You've got Joe Biden for the Democrats and Donald Trump for the Republicans. I mean, there is still another candidate in the Republican race, Nikki Haley, who has won one primary so far, which is DC, where they don't particularly like Trump. But yeah, Trump is expected to win all 15 of these. We've also seen overnight the US Supreme Court ruled that states can't prevent Trump from running under a particular constitutional amendment that Colorado in particular was trying to use to take him off the ballot, because he is engaged in insurrection or rebellion. The Supreme Court has struck that down, so Trump is free to run.
And that was a unanimous
completely
decision, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So that sort of also knocks out other states from trying to prevent him running under the same constitutional amendment. And he's got to sweep these primaries. So I think for me, this is now the point. I've kind of had my head in the sand a little bit over the Trump thing. I lived in the US when Trump was elected the first time, and I don't really want to re-experience this. And so I think for many of us, still hoping that one of these legal challenges might be the thing that gets him. But no, I think he will be running for president. And yeah, meanwhile, you've got Biden on the other side, who's making more and more gaffes. There's a lot of questions about both of their ages. Obviously, they're both the oldest people to run for president. And I think we're going to see more and more gaffes. I think we're going to see some of the most nonsensical debates imaginable. If you thought it was bad watching them last time, because they, of course, were the candidates for the 2020 presidential election. I think both of them have deteriorated mentally significantly over the last 4 years.
I
So
was actually going
I
to
think
ask about,
time to
if you don't mind, I was really interested. Obviously, Trump comes with his own enormous baggage, but he's got kind of a really rabid voter base who basically will stick with him no matter what. So that's obviously a huge boon to him while he's trying to get, the GOP nomination. Less certain that it plays well with the general election, as we saw, the last election where he lost to Biden. But Biden, as he said, is running essentially uncontested as the president running for re-election. But in Michigan, I was really intrigued by the uncommitted vote that we saw. And I was talking to my colleague, Emma Shortis, who works in our international and foreign affairs program. And she was kind of talking about the dynamic where there is an enormous voter backlash, particularly in Michigan, which has a large Arab and Muslim population, about the Democratic administration's attitudes and policies on Gaza and Israel's war on Gaza, the enormous civilian death toll, and feeling that the US is not doing enough to push a ceasefire and still arming Israel and all those kinds of other things. And we saw that phenomenon of a big chunk of people doing an uncommitted vote where they're not essentially giving it to Biden. And it kind of struck me as the first time I've seen anything like that so obvious in electoral terms in the United States. Do you think that's a big concern for the Democratic Party as they head into the general election, where I'm guessing turnout will be as important as ever?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can tell they're worried. It's not going to cost Biden the nomination, obviously, but that protest vote is sizable, and when it is going to be probably a close race between Trump and Biden, they are worried about people staying home. I think you've seen various Democrats sort of. I'm thinking particularly of Bernie Sanders coming forward and saying, like, yes, it's not good enough, but Trump would be worse. And of course, Sanders has played his own role in presidential elections before. You running for the nomination himself, and then a lot of his voters staying home the first time. So I think figures like leaders of the left in the US are worried about their voters staying home and not voting for Biden and Trump getting in that way. I think on the other side, you may also see a little bit of a protest vote from, we've seen Nikki Haley, who's the only remaining Republican challenger, suggesting that she may not stick to her promise to not run in the general race, which could see, of course, some Republicans peel off. But look, the US has a system that is very much a two-party system. Your vote is essentially wasted if you give it to someone else. And so, yeah, I think the Democrats will be doing everything they can to stem the tide on some of those protest votes. And I mean, we saw Kamala Harris the vice president, come out yesterday and call for a ceasefire. I think they're going to be doing what they can to try to assuage some of those concerns. I think it might be too late for many people who've watched the last few months play out. But certainly it is something for Joe Biden to be very worried about.
Yeah, because as you say, like in Australia, we've got a preferential voting system where if your first candidate doesn't get past the post, your vote still counts, towards who you would prefer ultimately
and
to see
compulsory
in that
voting.
seat.
Those
And
two things
compulsory
really.
voting. Two dynamics, completely missing in the United States. So potentially you had a lot of motivated Democratic voters at the last presidential election who were just so keen to see Trump out. And I think the dynamics are really interesting there. And obviously, the US has a huge role to play here in affecting what happens with Israel's war on Gaza and that massive, massive civilian death toll that's been so shocking right across the world. Off we are headlong into that presidential election for the rest of the year. I guess this is really what kind of kicks it all off in a big way, and big implications for not only for Gaza and all the civilians there, but for Australian politics and how closely entwined we are through the AUKUS agreement and other things. I will just let everyone know we have a webinar with Professor Hugh White and Emma Shortis about the latest issue of Australian Foreign Affairs magazine about AUKUS. It's called Dead in the Water. So they're going to be discussing that on Friday if you're keen to check that out. We're going to go to questions from the audience now. Rachel, the first question is from Roger Tonkin, and it is, should the name of the ex-politician or spy be revealed by ASIO? For people who haven't caught up with that story, can you tell us a little bit about what that was first?
So this was last week. We saw the ASIO Director General, Mike Burgess, come out and give his annual threat assessment, which has, caused headlines most years that he's done it in one way or another. But this year he decided to really make a point about foreign espionage and revealed that there was a former politician who was successfully cultivated by a foreign group of spies known as the A-Team, and they went so far as to even try to introduce their foreign handlers to a prime minister's family member. And of course, this question of who it is, Mike Burgess chose not to reveal their name. This took place before we had sort of the current laws that we have that would make this illegal. He has chosen in his infinite wisdom not to reveal the name of the politician, but it is obsessing people across the political spectrum. I'm very intrigued by the fact that I think when it first was announced last Thursday, the coalition was really, really eager to have this name revealed. Not all of them. You had kind of saw cooler heads, I think, suggesting that it should remain anonymous, but you had Peter Dutton and Joe Hockey really, really forcefully calling for the name to come out, and Peter Dutton implying that it was a particular person. That's all gone a little bit quiet this week. I think a lot of members of the public and journalists would still like to know, but I think the coalition has gone a little quiet. I think maybe they're not so sure anymore who it is. And of course, we've had people coming out and denying that it's them. There's a kind of go-to names. But yeah, I mean, I myself am torn on whether the name should come out. I mean, the argument being put forward by Mike Burgess is that it might compromise future investigations. And there are issues around the rule of law when this person can't be charged and defamation. This is one of those ones where I can see the argument both for revealing the name and keeping it anonymous. I mean, we'd all love to know. I was sitting in a pub on Saturday night and watching the Dunkley election results, and someone came down and sat next to me and told me like a complete stranger came and told me who he thought it was. And the gossip is delicious, but I think the main point that Mike Burgess was trying to get across is that this is a real threat, that these people are very good at what they do. And certainly the politicians know they're being watched now and are very, very aware of this issue. So I think mission accomplished for Mike Burgess, but he's going to keep copping criticism for dropping a bomb like this without a name.
Yeah, I think Nikki Sava on Insiders was kind of talking about the fact that he'd been trying multiple times to kind of warn politicians that this is happening in the background all the time and you need to be more alert to it, and hadn't really had much luck. So went with a more overt kind of approach that certainly seems to have cut through. The next question that I've got is about the by-election, and Jill Newton asks what you think happened to the Greens and the Green vote. Do you think the swing against them in the seat reflects an overall swing? Will they be rethinking their current strategies, or, as others have suggested in the chat, maybe with Greens voters voting strategically for Labor, or, other factors at play?
I mean, I don't know about that one, because we didn't see Labor's primary vote go up by much. It did hold and went up by like a fraction of a percent, but it didn't go up. I think partly it's that the Greens played dead. So I suppose that they weren't actively campaigning for votes in this election. We don't know where their votes went. there is the potential, I think, that some of them last election were kind of teal voters. There was no teal in Dunkley. We've seen teal candidates at a state level in that area, but that it was kind of the Lib votes going green instead of to Labor. There are certain Liberal voters who will just never vote Labor, but they'll happily vote Green. We've also seen sort of Conservatives claiming that the Greens vote was down because of the way they have been campaigning on the Gaza issue. I don't think that is necessarily true either. But I think, you know, you can't overstate the fact they didn't campaign here. This was a Labor Liberal race. This will never be a Green electorate, I would say. And I'm more interested in thinking about what is going on with the Liberal vote, I think, because we are seeing a lot of conversation about the swings in these tealy greeny booths. That is not the vast majority of Dunkley, but it is interesting to know what's going on with disaffected Liberals who may have voted Green or teal last time, and what they're going to do at the next election. You know, there are suggestions that such voters, tree Tories, you might call them, will return to voting on hip pocket issues, that having a Labor government who that is somewhat willing to go after things like the stage 3 tax cuts, and you know, massive super balances, tax concessions on things like that, that such voters who care about the environment might swing back to the Libs, especially with no Scott Morrison factor, but there's still a Peter Dutton factor. So I don't think we can necessarily draw too many conclusions from what was just a by-election, which didn't have all the parties running at full tilt. But yeah, certainly that Greens vote is down, and it is worth noting. But I haven't sensed too much concern from the Greens about it.
Yeah. The next question I've got is from Charles Livingston, and there's quite a few fans of yours in the chat. Very excited that we're talking to you today. So just a reminder, if you aren't a subscriber to The Politics, head on over to thepolitics.com.au and you can get as much as you like in your inbox of Rachel every day at 4 o'clock. Charles's question is, what's your perception of the likelihood of Dutton making it to the next election as the Liberal leader? Would Hastie or another potential leader, whoever that might be, make any difference? Or is the party organisation too ragged and divided at present?
Yeah, everyone keeps throwing Hastie's name around. It seems to have become, I mean, the only potential alternative. That's been the issue all along, is that there isn't really a candidate with the experience and the sort of seniority and the factional power in what's left of the Liberal Party. So I think Hastie is kind of when people are grasping at straws a little bit for a candidate. You know, he sort of looks the part, fits the bill in many ways, and would appeal far more to moderates. But I just don't think there is enough moderates in the party who want to pull back from what Peter Dutton is doing. I keep waiting for a sense of self-preservation to kick in. I mean, certainly that self-preservation is there for, self-restoration is there for the Liberal MPs who lost their seats over kind of the Liberal Party's rightward drift. But even for the more conservative members of the Liberal Party, you would think that at some point they might wonder if they ever want to get back into government, they might have to loosen their grip on the party a little bit, and accept that they do need moderates, that there isn't a majority for them. They can, you know, remain a fringe party, but I just keep wondering. I would have thought after Aston, this sense of self-preservation would kick in, and the need for a different leader and the need for a different path, but it doesn't seem to have hit them then, and it's certainly not hitting them now, especially with that nuclear announcement. So I think Dutton will be the leader at the next election, simply because, as I wrote in yesterday's column, like, you know, how many more wake-up calls do they need? If all of those wake-up calls haven't been enough, I'm not sure what would be enough.
Yeah. I've got a couple of people asking here about the dire state of the mainstream media / the ABC and how it kind of covers politics, essentially. But I actually want to use that to ask about that announcement from Meta last week or this week, getting all my weeks mixed up, around kind of withdrawing from the news media bargaining code and deprioritizing news and things like that. That was a pretty big fight of the coalition government at the time, and really the first time worldwide we had seen successful kind of regulation of the big tech companies. But a lot of people kind of foresaw that there would be problems with this, and they just have absolutely enormous market power. The government seemed pretty disappointed in its result and kind of keen to do something about it. Have you heard anything about, are they intending to use that news media bargaining code to bring them to the table, or, what do we know about that announcement and how the government intends to respond?
Yeah, we've seen the Assistant Treasurer, Stephen Jones, making a little bit of noise about it, because obviously this is causing a lot of alarm. And, I don't think many of us ever had faith that this money would last, but it has created a lot of jobs. And so, yeah, it's concerning. And so I think, yeah, the Labor Party has been making noises about this. It remains to be seen what they can actually do with that bargaining code. Of course, many people would remember when this was first introduced, we saw Facebook pull news from their site in Australia. It was an utterly bizarre day. And yeah, I don't think this is an actor that really has media or democracy's best interests at heart. It's about money. So we'll see what the government can manage to do with the code that they have, and what how they might be able to compel Facebook to cough up some money. But I have never had much faith in Facebook as a funding model for media, or for a place that is even a good place for media. We are in a alarming state, and have been for pretty much the whole time I've been a journalist. So, I take heart in the fact that there are a few little independent media outlets popping up at the moment, the politics included. But we're seeing alternative media. There's a whole bunch of independent media, independent podcasts. We're even seeing, a bunch of ex-Fairfax, ex-Nine journos come together to start Capital Brief, which is a paid model, like it's a subscription based, but people are out there giving it a crack and constantly trying to solve this funding dilemma that has been around as long as the internet, basically.
Yeah.
And I think there's a hunger for news. I mean, there seems to be a lot of disenchantment with the mainstream media, but people do want news. I mean, the fact that this webinar is so well attended, I am hopeful that we can continue to find new ways that don't involve money from Facebook to fund media, and yeah, to make sure that media is accessible. I mean, that's a big thing for me.
Yeah.
I mean, my newsletter is free, and I'd like to keep it that way, but it's about finding new ways to fund these things.
Yeah, because as the Australia Institute has pointed out for a long time, public interest journalism is not just a service. It's a fundamental part of a healthy democracy. It's actually one of the underpinning, key things that keeps a democracy strong and healthy. And it's a public good. It's accessible to everyone. Like, look at the ABC, look at your free newsletter, accessible to the public, and plays such a vital role in holding power to account and all of those kinds of things. So yeah, hugely important. I am afraid we're going to have to wrap it up a little bit early today, but thank you so much everyone for joining us. I can see a bunch of you in the comments were really happy to see Rachel in person after reading her newsletter so frequently. She is going to be a regular guest on Unparliamentary. I think the next time you're joining us is for the budget in May. So we'll look forward to that, and we'll be finding other opportunities to work with Rachel where we can. Again, a reminder to head on over to thepolitics.com.au. The next Unparliamentary that we'll be doing will be with Paul Bongiorno, who's a columnist for the New Daily and the Saturday paper, and a long-term veteran of federal politics, formerly of Channel 10 and elsewhere. Hopefully he's coming into the studio, but it'll be a sitting day, so we'll see how that will go. So you can sign up for more than one Unparliamentary. You can sign up for the rest of the year if you always love to know what's happening in federal politics, so please do that. Don't forget to head on over to australiainstitute.org.au for all our upcoming events, including the Yanis live stream from tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. Tickets are only on sale until midnight tonight, so please get on board and do that now so you don't miss out. And a reminder to check out our podcast, Follow the Money and Dollars and Cents. You can find them on iTunes or wherever you normally listen to podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us today, everyone. We'll see you in a fortnight or on Friday for our webinar with Emma Shortis and Professor Hugh White about AUKUS, Dead in the Water. Thanks so much for your time, Rachel, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, Ebony. Great to chat.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for watching. We love that we can make these videos free to watch, but they're not free to make. It's thanks to our generous supporters that we can keep making research and content that changes minds. So, if you like what we do, please consider giving to the Australia Institute so we can keep doing it. Visit our website australiainstitute.org.au and click the donate button to see how your support can help fund high quality research that matters.